Victor Kane ruled the city's underworld with an iron fist, a man who believed power meant never apologizing. One rainy evening, he humiliated a young black waitress named Aria in front of his crew, kicking her out of his restaurant for a minor mistake. What he didn't know was that Aria's father was the decorated Army General Marcus Hayes, a man who commanded respect from 500 loyal soldiers. The next morning, Victor woke to find his mansion surrounded by an impenetrable wall of uniformed men, their eyes cold and unwavering. In that frozen moment, the untouchable crime lord realized he had made the gravest mistake of his life. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. The rain came down in sheets across Chicago, turning Michigan Avenue into a river of reflected neon and blurred headlights. Victor Kane stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office above the Crimson Room, watching the city bend to the storm the way it bent to him, reluctantly, but inevitably. He was 42, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that held the flat calculation of a man who'd learned early that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford. His tailored charcoal suit fit like armor, and the gold watch on his wrist cost more than most people earned in a year. The Crimson Room occupied the ground floor of his building, a restaurant that served as both legitimate business and meeting place for the network of operations that made Victor Kane the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld. Loan sharking, protection, gambling, real estate, his fingers touched everything, and his grip never loosened. The restaurant itself was elegant, all dark wood and burgundy leather, with crystal chandeliers that cast warm light over tables where politicians and criminals ate side by side, neither group entirely sure which category they belonged to. Victor turned from the window as his phone buzzed. A text from Marco, his second-in-command. Shipment delayed. Weather. Tomorrow night instead. He typed back a single word. Unacceptable. Then he pocketed the phone and headed downstairs. Thursday nights he always ate in the restaurant, a visible reminder to everyone that this was his domain. The dining room hummed with quiet conversation and the clink of expensive silverware. Victor's usual table waited in the back corner, positioned so he could see every entrance, every face. His crew occupied the surrounding tables, Marco with his linebacker build and perpetual scowl, Tommy who handled the books, and young Frankie who was still trying too hard to prove himself. They stood as Victor approached, a gesture of respect that he accepted as his due. "Boss," Marco said, pulling out Victor's chair. "Everything good upstairs?" "It will be." Victor sat, and the others followed suit. "Tell Dominic I want that shipment here by noon tomorrow, weather or no weather." He knew the deadline. A waitress appeared at his elbow, young and nervous. Victor barely glanced at her. "Scotch, neat, and tell chef I want the ribeye, rare." "Yes, sir." She hurried away, and Victor noticed the slight tremor in her hands. Good. Fear kept people sharp, kept them from making mistakes. The restaurant's newest waitress, Aria Hayes, moved through the dining room with careful precision. She was 23, with warm brown skin and dark eyes that held more intelligence than her station suggested. She wore the standard uniform, black slacks, white shirt, burgundy vest, and carried herself with a quiet dignity that came from being raised by a father who believed respect was earned through character, not demanded through intimidation. She was working her way through nursing school, picking up shifts at the Crimson Room because the tips were good and the hours fit her class schedule. She'd been warned about Victor Kane by the other servers. Don't make eye contact unless he speaks to you first. Don't ask questions. Don't ever, ever make him wait. Aria had nodded, filed the information away, and decided she'd treat him like any other customer, with professional courtesy and nothing more. She didn't believe in bowing to bullies, but she needed this job, so she'd be smart about it. The evening progressed smoothly until Aria was assigned to bring Victor's table their entrees. She balanced the heavy tray with practiced ease, navigating between tables until she reached the corner. "Ribeye, rare," she announced, setting the plate before Victor. "Salmon for you, sir," she continued, serving Marco. "And the pasta?" Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This is medium." Aria paused, glancing at the steak. It looked rare to her, the center deep red, but she kept her tone neutral. "I can have chef prepare another if you'd prefer, sir." "I don't prefer." "I ordered rare. This is medium. Are you blind or just incompetent?" The nearby tables fell silent. Aria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but but she maintained her composure. "I apologize. I'll take it back immediately." "You'll take it back?" Victor's laugh was cold. "You think that fixes it? You think I'm going to sit here and wait another 20 minutes because you can't do your job?" "Sir, I didn't cook the steak. You just what? You just brought me something I didn't order, and now you're arguing with me?" Victor stood, and the movement felt like a threat. He was a tall man, and he used his size deliberately. "You know what your problem is? You people think you can half-ass everything and there won't be consequences." The words hung in the air, their implication clear. Aria's jaw tightened. Around them, the restaurant had gone completely quiet, every eye on the confrontation. She could feel the weight of the moment, the choice crystallizing before her: swallow the insult and keep her job, or stand up for herself and face whatever came next. "I'm not arguing, sir. I'm trying to fix the problem, but I won't stand here and be disrespected because you're having a bad day." Her voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Victor's eyes went flat and cold. "Get out." "Excuse me? You're fired. Get your things and get out of my restaurant, now." He turned to Marco. "Make sure she leaves, and if she says one word on her way out, throw her out the front door. I don't care if it's raining." Aria stood frozen for a moment, disbelief and anger warring in her chest. Then she carefully set down the tray, removed her vest, and folded it with deliberate precision. She placed it on the table, looked Victor Kane directly in the eye, and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself." Then she walked toward the back to collect her purse, her head high, refusing to let them see her shake. Behind her, she heard Victor's voice, loud enough to carry, "Anyone else want to question how I run my business?" Silence answered him. Aria pushed through the kitchen doors, grabbed her bag from her locker, and left through the back exit into the rain. The cold water soaked through her shirt within seconds, but she barely felt it. She was too angry, too humiliated, too aware that she'd just lost a job she desperately needed because a powerful man had decided to make an example of her. She didn't know that her father, General Marcus Hayes, was currently at Fort Sheridan, 20 miles north, finishing a late meeting with his command staff. She didn't know that she'd call him in tears within the hour, or that his response would be immediate and absolute. She didn't know that Victor Kane had just made the kind of enemy that money and power couldn't protect him from. All she knew was that the rain tasted like salt and fury, and somewhere in this city, there had to be justice. Inside the Crimson Room, Victor sat back down and cut into his steak. It was, in fact, perfectly rare. He ate it without comment, and no one at his table said a word. Aria drove through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago with tears blurring her vision, pulling over twice because she couldn't see well enough to continue safely. By the time she reached her small apartment in Hyde Park, the anger had settled into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, watching rain stream down the windshield, trying to compose herself before going inside. Her roommate, Jessica, was studying at the kitchen table when Aria walked in, dripping water onto the linoleum. "Oh my God, what happened?" The story came out in fragments. The steak, the insult, the humiliation, the firing. Jessica listened with growing outrage, then hugged her friend tightly. "That's discrimination, Aria. You could sue him. With what lawyer? What money?" Aria pulled away, wiping her eyes. "Men like Victor Kane don't face consequences. They own this city. Your dad—" "No." Aria's voice was sharp. "I'm not running to my father every time something goes wrong. I'm 23 years old. I need to handle my own problems." But at midnight, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, she found herself reaching for her phone. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "Aria, what's wrong?" General Marcus Hayes was 51, a career military man who'd risen through the ranks on merit and integrity. He'd served 3 tours overseas, commanded thousands of soldiers, and earned a chest full of medals that he kept in a drawer because he believed real honor didn't need display. He was a widower. Aria's mother had died of cancer when Aria was 16, and his daughter was the center of his world, though he was careful not to smother her independence. "Dad, I'm okay. I had a bad night at work. Tell me." It wasn't a request, so she did. She told him everything, including the racial undertone of Victor's words, the public humiliation, the way the entire restaurant had watched her be degraded and done nothing. Marcus listened without interrupting, but Aria could hear the change in his breathing, the tightening of his voice when he finally spoke. "What's his name?" "Dad, I'm not asking you to." "What's his name, Aria?" "Victor Kane." He owns the Crimson Room, but Dad, he's not just some restaurant owner. He's connected. Dangerous. I looked him up online after I got home. There are rumors about organized crime, about people who crossed him disappearing. I don't want you involved in this. I'm already involved. He put his hands on my daughter. He didn't touch me. He fired me, humiliated me. But he didn't. He kicked you out into the rain after calling you people. That's enough. Marcus's voice had gone quiet, which anyone who knew him understood was far more dangerous than shouting. I'll handle this. How? You let me worry about that. I want you to go to sleep, and tomorrow, I want you to focus on your classes. This Victor Kane is about to learn something about consequences. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his quarters at Fort Sheridan, staring at the phone in his hand. Then, he made a series of calls. The first was to his executive officer, Colonel James Patterson. Jim, I need you to pull together a company-sized element. Full-dress uniform. I want them ready to move at 0600. Sir? What's the mission? I'll brief you in the morning. Just get me 500 of our best. And Jim? They need to understand this is personal. The next call was to his old friend, Federal Judge Harold Chen, who owed Marcus a favor from their days serving together in Iraq. Harold, I need information on a man named Victor Kane. Chicago. Suspected organized crime. I need to know everything. His operations, his properties, his vulnerabilities. Marcus, what are you planning? I'm planning to have a conversation. A very public, very clear conversation about respect. By Oro 400, Marcus had a full dossier on Victor Kane. The man was indeed a crime lord, running operations throughout Chicago with apparent immunity. He had connections to city officials, judges, and police. He'd been investigated multiple times but never charged. His primary residence was a mansion in Lincoln Park, a fortress of stone and iron that proclaimed his untouchable status. Marcus studied the property layout, the security measures, the surrounding streets. Then he smiled, a cold expression that his soldiers would have recognized. He'd spent 30 years learning how to project force, how to make a statement that couldn't be ignored. Victor Kane thought he was powerful because he controlled criminals and corrupt officials. He was about to learn what real power looked like. At Fort Sheridan, 500 soldiers assembled in the pre-dawn darkness. They were men and women from various units, all volunteers once they heard the general's daughter had been wronged. They wore their dress uniforms, medals gleaming even in the dim light, and they stood in perfect formation as Marcus addressed them. What we're doing today isn't about revenge, he told them, his voice carrying across the assembly ground. It's about accountability. It's about reminding certain people that there are still lines you don't cross, still principles that matter. A man named Victor Kane believes his money and his criminal connections put him above basic human decency. We're going to correct that misunderstanding. No violence, no property damage. We're simply going to deliver a message. Are you with me? The answering, yes, sir, echoed like thunder. They moved out in convoy as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, a line of military vehicles that stretched for blocks. Chicago's early morning commuters stared as the convoy passed, phones coming out to record the unusual sight. By the time they reached Lincoln Park, social media was already buzzing with speculation. Victor Kane's mansion sat behind a 10-foot iron fence, with security cameras at every corner and 2 guards at the gate. The guards' eyes widened as the convoy approached, vehicles parking in a perfect perimeter around the entire block. Soldiers emerged, forming ranks, creating a human wall 500 strong that surrounded the property completely. Marcus stepped out of the lead vehicle, his uniform crisp, his bearing that of a man who'd commanded in war zones and wouldn't be intimidated by a Chicago crime lord. He walked to the front gate, where the guards had their hands on their weapons but clearly had no idea what to do. I'm here to see Victor Kane, Marcus announced. Tell him General Marcus Hayes would like a word. Tell him it's about his behavior toward my daughter. One guard fumbled for his radio, while the other just stared at the impossible sight of 500 soldiers standing at parade rest, silent and immovable. Inside the mansion, Victor Kane was about to have the worst morning of his life. Victor Kane woke to the sound of his head of security, Dimitri, pounding on his bedroom door. Boss, you need to see this. Victor rolled out of bed, disoriented and irritated. It was barely 7 in the morning, and he'd been up late dealing with the shipment issues. This better be good, Dimitri. It's not good, it's... Dimitri's voice trailed off as Victor opened the door. The man's face was pale, his usual composure shattered. You need to come to the security room. Now. Victor followed him downstairs, his irritation growing. But when he entered the security room and saw the bank of monitors, his blood went cold. Every screen showed the same impossible sight: soldiers, hundreds of them, surrounding his property in perfect formation, their presence transforming his fortress into a prison. What the hell is this? Who are they? United States Army, sir. There's a general at the front gate asking to speak with you. Says his name is Marcus Hayes. Dimitri pulled up the gate camera, zooming in on a tall black man in full dress uniform, his chest covered in medals, his expression carved from stone. Says it's about his daughter. Victor's mind raced back through the previous evening, through the faces and interactions, until it landed on the waitress, the one he'd fired, the one he'd humiliated in front of his crew. "You people," he'd said, and she'd looked at him with those steady eyes and told him he should be ashamed. "His daughter," Victor repeated, the words tasting like ash. He moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to see for himself. The sight was even more overwhelming in person. A sea of uniforms, disciplined and silent, creating a perimeter that no amount of money or influence could breach. News helicopters were already circling overhead, and he could see civilians gathering on the surrounding streets, phones out, recording everything. Marco burst into the room, Tommy and Frankie behind him. "Boss, what do we do? We got maybe 20 guys in the house, but there's hundreds of them out there, and they're military. We can't just—" "I know what they are," Victor snapped. His mind was working frantically, trying to find an angle, a way out. He'd built his empire on understanding leverage, on knowing how to pressure people into giving him what he wanted. But this was a show of force he couldn't match, couldn't buy his way out of, couldn't threaten into submission. "Call Alderman Morrison," he ordered, "and Chief Donnelly. Get them here now. This is harassment. It's—" "Sir." Dimitri's voice was quiet. "I don't think that's going to help. Look at the crowd." Victor looked. The civilians gathering weren't just curious onlookers. Many were holding signs, hastily made but clear. "Justice for Aria. Kane's crimes end now. We stand with General Hayes." Somehow, in the few hours since dawn, the story had spread. His treatment of a young black woman, the general's response. It was already becoming a narrative, and Victor was cast as the villain. His phone rang. It was Alderman Morrison. "Victor, what the hell have you done? I've got the mayor's office calling me. The press is going crazy, and there's a goddamn army surrounding your house. I can't help you with this. Whatever you did, you need to fix it yourself." The call ended. Victor stared at his phone, feeling control slip through his fingers like water. His whole life, he'd been the one with power, the one who made others afraid. Now he stood in his own home, surrounded, exposed, and for the first time in decades, genuinely frightened. "Boss?" Marco's voice was uncertain. "What do you want us to do?" Victor took a breath, forcing himself to think. "Get everyone away from the windows. No weapons visible. We're not giving them any excuse to escalate this." He turned to Dimitri. "Tell the general I'll speak with him. At the gate. 5 minutes." As his security team scrambled to comply, Victor went to his study and poured himself a scotch, downing it in one swallow. He looked at himself in the mirror, still wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair uncombed, his face showing every one of his 42 years. He looked like what he was, a man who'd been caught off guard, outmaneuvered, and outclassed. He dressed quickly in slacks and a button-down shirt, choosing his clothes carefully. Not a suit. That would look like he was trying to assert authority he didn't have. Not casual. That would show disrespect. Something in between. Something that said he understood the gravity of the situation. When he walked to the front gate, he could feel eyes on him from every direction. His own men, watching from the house. The soldiers standing like statues. The growing crowd of civilians and press. The news helicopters overhead. This moment was being recorded, broadcast, turned into a story that would define him. General Marcus Hayes stood on the other side of the Iron Gate, and Victor understood immediately that this was a man who'd faced down enemies far more dangerous than a Chicago crime lord. The general's eyes held no anger, no rage, just a cold, absolute certainty that made Victor's carefully constructed intimidation tactics look like a child's tantrum. "Mr. Kane," the general's voice was measured, carrying easily in the morning air. "I'm General Marcus Hayes. Last night you fired my daughter from her job at your restaurant. Before you did so, you humiliated her publicly, used racially charged language, and threatened to have her physically thrown into the street. "I'm here to discuss your behavior." Victor's mouth was dry. Every instinct told him to deflect, to deny, to attack. But those instincts had been honed in a world where he held the power. This was different. "General, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's been no misunderstanding. I have statements from 6 witnesses. I have security footage from your restaurant. I have my daughter's testimony, and I believe her absolutely. So let's not waste time with denials." Marcus took a step closer to the gate, and despite the iron bars between them, Victor felt the urge to step back. "You're a man who's used to getting away with things, Mr. Kane. You've built your life on the idea that money and fear make you untouchable. Today, you learn different. What do you want?" Victor's voice came out rougher than he intended. "I want you to understand something fundamental. My daughter is a nursing student. She works hard, treats people with respect, and tries to make the world better. You're a criminal who profits from others' suffering. In any just world, she would be worth 1,000 of you. But you treated her like garbage because you could, because no one's ever made you face consequences." Marcus gestured to the soldiers behind him. "These men and women have volunteered their morning to stand here and make a point. The point is this: there are still people in this world who believe in accountability, in justice, in basic human decency, and when you cross certain lines, those people will respond." Victor felt sweat running down his back, despite the cool morning air. "This is intimidation. It's a peaceful demonstration. We're on public property. We're not threatening you or your people. We're simply here, visible, making sure everyone knows what you did and who you really are." Marcus's expression didn't change. "The question now is what happens next. And that, Mr. Kane, is entirely up to you." The standoff continued for 3 hours. Victor retreated to his mansion, pacing his study while his crew watched nervously, and the soldiers outside remained in perfect formation. The story had exploded across social media and news outlets. Justice for Aria was trending nationally. Reporters were interviewing people in the crowd, and the narrative was solidifying. Powerful crime lord humiliates young black woman. Her father, a decorated war hero, responds with overwhelming but peaceful show of force. Victor's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Business associates, political connections, even his own family. Everyone wanted to know what he was going to do. But more concerning were the calls that didn't come. His usual protectors, the officials he'd paid off for years, were suddenly unavailable. They smelled blood in the water and were distancing themselves. Tommy knocked on the study door. "Boss, you need to see this." He held up his tablet, showing a news broadcast. The anchor was interviewing a former employee of the Crimson Room, a young man who'd quit 6 months earlier. "Mr. Kane runs that restaurant like his own personal kingdom," the man was saying. "I saw him berate staff constantly, especially the women, especially people of color. What happened to Aria Hayes wasn't unusual. It was just the first time someone with power fought back." Victor snatched the tablet and threw it across the room, where it shattered against the wall. "Get me my lawyer. Now." But his lawyer, when he finally arrived, had no good news. "Victor, you're in an impossible position. You can't force military personnel off public streets. You can't sue a general for exercising his First Amendment rights. And with the media coverage, any move you make will be scrutinized. If you try to retaliate against the daughter, you'll have federal charges to deal with. If you try to wait this out, the story just gets bigger. So what do you suggest?" The lawyer hesitated. "Apologize. Publicly. Rehire the girl with back pay. Make a substantial donation to a relevant charity. Try to salvage what reputation you have left." "I don't apologize." Victor's voice was flat. "I've built everything on the principle that I don't back down. I don't show weakness. If I apologize now, every 2-bit punk in Chicago will think they can challenge me. Then you'll lose everything anyway. Victor, look out your window. You're already losing. The question is whether you lose with some dignity and tact, or whether you go down fighting and take everything with you." Victor did look out the window. The crowd had grown. There were hundreds of civilians now, standing in solidarity with the soldiers. He saw signs, heard chanting. "Accountability now!" they shouted. "Kane must pay!" The helicopters overhead were broadcasting every moment. This wasn't just about one fired waitress anymore. It had become something larger, a referendum on power, privilege, and justice. In his heart, Victor knew his lawyer was right, but admitting it meant confronting something he'd avoided his entire adult life, the possibility that he'd been wrong, that the empire he'd built was founded on cruelty and exploitation, that the man he'd become was someone worthy of this public condemnation. He thought about his father, dead now for 15 years. The old man had been a small-time enforcer for the Chicago outfit, a brutal man who'd taught Victor that the world was divided into predators and prey. Never apologize, never explain, never show mercy, his father had told him. The moment you do, you're finished. Victor had lived by those words, and they'd made him rich and powerful. They'd also made him alone. He had no wife, no children, no real friends, only employees and associates bound to him by money and fear. He lived in a mansion surrounded by security because he'd made so many enemies. He ate in his own restaurant because it was one of the few places he felt safe, and now, even that safety was an illusion, shattered by one act of casual cruelty toward a young woman who'd done nothing wrong. Marco entered the study quietly. "Boss, the guys are getting nervous. Some of them are talking about leaving, going out the back, getting away before this gets worse. What do I tell them?" Victor looked at his second-in-command, this man who'd been loyal for a decade, and saw doubt in his eyes for the first time. "Tell them," he paused. "Tell them to stand down. No one leaves. We're going to handle this." "How?" "I'm going to talk to the general again." Marco's eyebrows rose. "And say what?" "The truth." Victor surprised himself with the words. "I'm going to tell him the truth." He walked back to the gate, and this time he had the security team open it. He stepped through, standing on the public sidewalk, facing General Hayes with no barrier between them. The crowd noise died down as people realized something was happening. Cameras zoomed in. This moment would be replayed thousands of times. "General Hayes," Victor began, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears, uncertain, stripped of its usual command. "I need to tell you something, and I need everyone to hear it." He gestured to the cameras, the crowd. "Last night I treated your daughter terribly. I humiliated her for no reason except that I was in a bad mood and I could. I used language that was racially charged and completely unacceptable. I had her fired and threatened to have her physically removed from my restaurant. Everything you've said about me is true." The general's expression didn't change, but he nodded slightly. "Go on." "I've spent my whole life believing that power meant never having to answer for my actions. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, and told myself it was just business, just the way the world works. But standing here, seeing all of this," he gestured to the soldiers, the crowd, the spectacle his cruelty had created, "I understand that I've been wrong. Not just about last night, about everything." Victor's voice cracked, and he realized with shock that he was on the verge of tears. "I can't undo what I did. I can't give your daughter back the dignity I took from her. But I can tell the truth, and I can try to be better. If she'll accept it, I want to apologize to her directly. I want to compensate her for what I did. And I want to—" He paused, the words feeling like they were being dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "I want to change. I don't know if I can, but I want to try." The silence that followed was absolute. Then General Hayes spoke, his voice still measured, but with something new in it. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the possibility of it. "Mr. Kane, my daughter doesn't need your money. She needs your genuine remorse and your commitment to do better. Not just toward her, but toward everyone you've wronged. Do you understand what that means?" "I'm beginning to." Victor looked at the soldiers, at their young faces, at the discipline and honor they represented. "I've been the villain of my own story for so long. I forgot there was any other way to be. But I'm looking at these men and women, at what they represent, and I'm ashamed. Genuinely ashamed." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Arya, I'm here with Mr. Kane. He has something to say to you. I'm going to put you on speaker." Victor heard the click, then a young woman's voice, cautious and wary. "I'm listening." "Miss Hayes, this is Victor Kane. I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. What I did last night was cruel, racist, and inexcusable. You did nothing wrong. You handled yourself with more dignity and grace than I've shown in my entire life. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And if you'll allow it, I'd like to make amends. Not with money, but with real change in how I conduct myself and my business." There was a long pause. Then Arya's voice came through, steady and clear. "Mr. Kane, I accept your apology, but I need you to understand something. I'm not special. I'm just one person you hurt because you could. If you really want to make amends, you need to think about all the other people you've treated the same way. All the people who didn't have a general for a father. Can you do that?" Victor closed his eyes. I can try. I will try. Then I hope you succeed. For everyone's sake. The call ended. Victor stood on the sidewalk, feeling exposed and raw, aware that his entire world had just shifted on its axis. The old Victor Kane, the man who ruled through fear and never apologized, was gone. What would replace him, he didn't yet know. But for the first time in decades, he felt something other than the cold satisfaction of power. He felt the painful, difficult stirrings of conscience. The soldiers departed at noon, their mission accomplished. The crowd dispersed slowly, many people still filming, still discussing what they'd witnessed. Victor returned to his mansion, but it felt different now, less like a fortress, and more like a monument to wasted years. His crew gathered in the living room, uncertain and uneasy. Marco spoke for all of them. Boss, what happens now? With the business? With everything? Victor looked at the men who'd followed him for years, who'd carried out his orders without question, who'd helped him build an empire on exploitation and fear. What happens now is change. Real change. I meant what I said out there. You're going legitimate? Tommy's voice was skeptical. I'm going to try. I'm going to start by making things right with the people we've hurt, the shop owners we've extorted, the families we've threatened, the employees we've abused. We're going to pay back what we can and walk away from what we can't fix. Victor saw the doubt on their faces. I know you don't believe me. I barely believe myself, but I'm done being the man I was. Over the following weeks, Victor began the painful process of dismantling his criminal empire. He met with business owners he'd extorted and returned their money with interest. He shut down his illegal gambling operations and paid his employees severance. He cooperated with federal investigators, providing information about corrupt officials and other criminal operations, accepting that his testimony would likely result in criminal charges against himself. His lawyer was appalled. Victor, you're committing financial suicide. You're going to end up bankrupt and possibly in prison. I know, but I'll end up human again. That's worth more than I thought. The hardest meeting was with Aria Hayes. General Hayes arranged it at a neutral location, a community center in Hyde Park where Aria volunteered. Victor arrived alone. No security, no crew, just himself in simple clothes, carrying nothing but his conscience. Aria met him in a small conference room. She looked tired but composed, her eyes still holding that steady intelligence that had unsettled him the first time he saw it. Mr. Kane, Miss Hayes, thank you for agreeing to see me. Victor sat across from her, keeping the table between them. I've been thinking about what you said, about all the other people I've hurt. You were right. There are dozens, maybe hundreds. I'm trying to make amends where I can, but I wanted you to know that it started with you. What you said that night, you should be ashamed of yourself. Those words have been echoing in my head ever since. I meant them. I know. And you were right to say them. I was ashamed. I am ashamed. But I'm also grateful because you and your father forced me to confront who I'd become. Victor leaned forward. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your courage, standing up to me when everyone else was too afraid, it changed something fundamental. You probably saved my life, or at least my soul. Aria studied him for a long moment. My father taught me that everyone deserves a chance at redemption. But redemption requires action, not just words. What are you actually doing, Mr. Kane? Victor told her everything. The restitution payments, the cooperation with investigators, the shuttering of illegal operations. He told her about the legitimate businesses he was keeping, and his plan to turn them into places where employees were treated with respect and dignity. He told her about the scholarship fund he was establishing for nursing students, named after her mother. Why my mother? Because your father told me about her. How she was a nurse. How she dedicated her life to helping people. How she raised you to be strong and principled. I never knew my mother. She left when I was young. But I think if I had, if she'd been someone like yours, maybe I would have turned out different. The scholarship is my way of honoring what I didn't have and what you did. Aria's eyes glistened. That's actually meaningful, Mr. Kane. Victor, please, I'm not anyone's boss anymore. I'm just a man trying to figure out how to live with himself. They talked for 2 hours. Aria told him about her nursing classes, her dreams of working in pediatrics, her mother's battle with cancer. Victor found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. His father's brutality, his own fear and loneliness, the way power had become a substitute for connection. When they finally stood to leave, Aria did something unexpected. She offered her hand. Victor shook it, feeling the simple human contact like an electric shock. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me a chance to be better. Don't thank me yet. Show me. Show everyone. Prove that people can change." Victor left the community center feeling lighter than he had in years. The work ahead was daunting. He faced potential prison time, financial ruin, and the constant challenge of unlearning 42 years of toxic behavior. But he also felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. General Hayes was waiting outside, leaning against his car. "Mr. Kane." "General, I didn't know you were here. I wanted to make sure my daughter was safe. Old habit." Marcus pushed off from the car. "She told me what you're doing. The restitution, the cooperation with authorities, the scholarship fund. I'm impressed. Don't be. Not yet. I've got a long way to go before I've earned anyone's respect." "True, but you're walking the path. That's more than most people in your position ever do." Marcus extended his hand. "My daughter believes in second chances. I'm more skeptical, but I'm willing to watch and see what you become." Victor shook the general's hand, feeling the strength in that grip, the integrity. "I won't let her down, or you, or myself, not anymore." As Victor drove back to his mansion, soon to be sold, the proceeds going to his victims, he passed the Crimson Room. The restaurant was closed, a for sale sign in the window. He'd shut it down the day after the siege, unable to stomach the memories of all the cruelty that had occurred within those walls. But as he looked at the dark windows, he had an idea. Not a restaurant. Something else. Something that might actually help people instead of feeding his ego. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. "I want to turn the Crimson Room into a community center. Job training, GED classes, resources for people trying to turn their lives around. Can we make that happen?" His lawyer sighed. "Victor, you're already broke. I'll find the money. This is important. This is..." He paused, searching for the right words. "This is how I start building something worth leaving behind." The transformation wasn't easy or quick. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, times when Victor felt the pull of his old ways. But every time he wavered, he thought about Aria Hayes standing in the rain, about 500 soldiers standing in silent judgment, about the man he'd been and the man he wanted to become. And slowly, painfully, he changed. 18 months after the siege, Victor Kane stood in the renovated space that had once been the Crimson Room. The dark wood and burgundy leather were gone, replaced by bright paint, comfortable furniture, and computer stations. The crystal chandeliers had been sold, the money used to fund scholarships. In their place, simple but warm lighting illuminated a space that now served as a community center, offering job training, education programs, and support services to people trying to rebuild their lives. The grand opening was today, and Victor was nervous in a way he'd never been when running his criminal empire. This mattered in a different way. This was about creation instead of destruction, about helping instead of hurting. If he failed at this, it wouldn't just be a business loss, it would be a moral one. Aria Hayes arrived early, before the official ceremony. She'd graduated from nursing school and was now working at Children's Memorial Hospital, but she'd agreed to serve on the community center's board of directors. "Victor," she greeted him with a smile that still felt like a gift he didn't deserve. "The place looks amazing. Thanks to you and the planning committee. I just wrote the checks." Victor gestured around the space. "Sometimes I walk in here, and I can't believe this is the same building where I was such a monster. That's the point, isn't it? Transformation. Taking something that represented the worst of who you were and making it represent the best of who you're becoming." Aria touched his arm gently. "You've done good work, Victor. Real, meaningful work. You should be proud." Pride wasn't something Victor felt easily anymore. He'd learned that pride had been part of his problem, the arrogant certainty that he was entitled to power, to respect, to treating others as beneath him. But he was learning a different kind of satisfaction, one that came from service rather than dominance. General Hayes arrived with a group of veterans, men and women who'd be using the center's job training programs. Marcus had become an unexpected ally in Victor's transformation, offering guidance and occasionally calling him out when he slipped into old patterns. "Mr. Kane," the general said, shaking his hand firmly. "Ready for today?" "As ready as I'll ever be. Thank you for bringing your people. Having veterans here, having your endorsement. It means everything. You've earned it. Slowly, carefully, but you've earned it." Marcus looked around the space, nodding approval. My wife would have loved this place. She always believed in second chances, in the power of community to heal. I think she'd be proud of what you've built here. The ceremony began at noon. Local officials spoke, community leaders offered blessings, and Arya gave a speech about the importance of accountability and redemption. Then it was Victor's turn. He stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, a mix of community members, former victims of his crimes, people he'd hurt, and was still trying to make amends to, and felt the weight of the moment. 18 months ago, he began. I was a different man, a worse man. I built my life on fear and exploitation, and I told myself that was just how the world worked. Then I hurt someone I had no right to hurt, and her father, General Marcus Hayes, showed me that there are still people in this world who believe in justice, in accountability, in basic human decency. He found Arya in the crowd, her steady gaze encouraging him to continue. That moment, standing outside my house surrounded by 500 soldiers, was the worst moment of my life. It was also the best, because it forced me to confront who I'd become. I was a bully, a criminal, a man who caused suffering and called it success. I'm not that man anymore, or at least I'm trying not to be. Victor gestured to the space around them. This community center is my attempt to build something good from the ruins of my old life. It's named the Eleanor Hayes Community Center, after the mother of the young woman I wronged, a nurse who dedicated her life to helping others. I hope this place honors her memory by helping people the way she did, with compassion, with respect, with the understanding that everyone deserves a chance to build a better life. He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. I can't undo the harm I've caused. I've made restitution where I could, but some damage can't be repaired with money. All I can do is commit to being better, to using whatever time I have left to help instead of hurt. This center is part of that commitment. And to everyone I've wronged, I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry. I hope my actions from here forward will prove that my apology is genuine. The applause was tentative at first, then growing. Not everyone forgave him. He knew that, accepted it, but some did, and that was more grace than he'd expected or deserved. After the ceremony, Victor spent hours talking with community members, listening to their needs, learning about the challenges they faced. An elderly woman told him about her grandson who needed job training. A young man recently released from prison asked about GED classes. A veteran with PTSD inquired about support groups. Victor took notes, made promises, and felt the unfamiliar satisfaction of being useful rather than feared. As the sun set and the crowd thinned, Victor found himself alone in the center with Arya and General Hayes. They stood in what had once been his private dining area, the corner where he'd humiliated Arya, and set in motion the events that changed his life. This spot, Arya said quietly. This is where it happened. Where you fired me. I know. I think about it every time I'm here. Victor looked at the space, now set up with computers for job seekers. I wanted to turn this specific area into something helpful, something that would represent the opposite of what happened here. Does it work? Does it feel like enough? Arya considered. It's not about enough. It's about direction. You're moving in the right direction, Victor. You're building instead of destroying. That's what matters. General Hayes nodded. My daughter's right. Redemption isn't a destination. It's a journey. You're on that journey now. The question is whether you'll stay on it when things get hard, when no one's watching, when the cameras are gone and it's just you and your choices. I will, Victor said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. I have to, because going back to who I was would be worse than death. That man was empty, General. Powerful, but empty. I'd rather be broke and struggling but actually human than go back to that hollowness. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. And that's something I never thought I'd say to Victor Kane. They left together, walking out into the Chicago evening. The city lights reflected off the lake in the distance, and the air carried the promise of autumn. Victor locked the community center's doors, then stood for a moment, looking at the sign above the entrance. Eleanor Hayes Community Center. A place of second chances. His phone buzzed. A text from his parole officer, reminding him of their meeting next week. Victor had pleaded guilty to racketeering and served 8 months in federal prison before being released on parole. He still had 3 years of supervision ahead of him, regular check-ins, restrictions on his activities, but he'd accepted the consequences of his crimes as part of his transformation. You okay? Arya asked, noticing his expression. Yeah. Just thinking about how different my life is now. 18 months ago, I lived in a mansion with armed guards. Now I live in a 2-bedroom apartment and report to a parole officer. I have about 5% of the money I used to have, and most of that's going to restitution payments. By any objective measure, I've lost everything. And yet I'm happier than I've ever been. I sleep through the night now. I don't wake up wondering who's plotting against me or what crimes I need to cover up. I have actual friends, not employees, not people who fear me, but people who genuinely care about me, including, somehow, the woman I wronged and her father who could have destroyed me. Victor shook his head in wonder. How did I get so lucky? It's not luck, General Hayes said. It's grace. You were given a chance to change, and you took it. Not everyone does. Most people in your position would have fought, denied, tried to use their power to escape consequences. You chose differently. That's not luck. That's character, even if it took a crisis to reveal it. They walked together to the parking lot. Before they parted ways, Aria hugged Victor, a gesture that still surprised him every time, the simple human warmth of it. I'm proud of you, she said. My mother would have been too. She always said people could change if they really wanted to. You're proving her right. Victor drove home to his modest apartment, so different from the mansion he'd once owned. But as he unlocked the door and stepped inside, he felt something he'd never felt in that fortress of stone and iron. He felt at peace. The apartment was small but comfortable, decorated with photos from the community center's opening, thank you notes from people he'd helped, reminders of the life he was building. He made himself dinner, something he'd never done in his old life, when he'd had a personal chef, and ate while reading a book on restorative justice that Aria had recommended. Later, he video called with his sponsor from the support group he attended for people trying to leave criminal lifestyles behind. They talked about the day's successes and challenges, about the ongoing work of transformation. Before bed, Victor stood at his window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, people were making the same mistakes he'd made, choosing power over principle, cruelty over compassion, fear over love. He couldn't save them all. He could barely save himself. But he could keep trying, keep building, keep proving that change was possible. He thought about the moment outside his mansion, surrounded by 500 soldiers, frozen in fear and shame. That moment had felt like the end of his world. In a way, it had been, but it had also been the beginning of something new, something better. The old Victor Kane had died that day, and from his ashes, a new man was slowly, painfully being born. It wasn't easy. Some days he still felt the pull of his old ways, the temptation to solve problems with intimidation rather than dialogue. Some days he resented the consequences of his crimes, the restrictions and limitations. Some days he wondered if he'd ever truly be free of his past, but then he'd visit the community center and see people learning, growing, building better lives. He'd receive a message from someone he'd made restitution to, telling him they appreciated his efforts. He'd have coffee with Aria and General Hayes, and they'd treat him not as a former criminal, but as a friend. And on those days, Victor Kane understood that he'd found something more valuable than all the power and money he'd once possessed. He'd found redemption, not complete, not perfect, but real, and growing stronger every day. The rain began to fall outside his window, gentle and cleansing, washing the city clean. Victor watched it for a while, remembering another rainy night when he'd sent a young woman out into the storm and set in motion the events that saved his soul. Thank you, Aria, he whispered to the night. Thank you, General Hayes. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. Tomorrow he'd wake up and continue the work. He'd help more people at the community center, make more restitution payments, attend more meetings with his parole officer. He'd keep building the life he should have lived all along, one choice at a time, one day at a time. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It was better. Outside, the rain fell steady and sure, and Victor Kane, former crime lord, current community servant, and living proof that people could change, finally, truly, completely let go of the man he'd been and embrace the man he was becoming. The city slept. The soldiers who'd surrounded his house were back at their posts, serving with honor. Aria Hayes was home, studying for her nursing certification exams, secure in the knowledge that she'd helped save a man's soul. General Marcus Hayes sat in his quarters, proud of his daughter and cautiously hopeful about the transformation he'd witnessed. And in a small apartment in Chicago, Victor Kane closed his eyes and slept without nightmares for the first time in decades. dreaming not of power and fear, but of community and redemption and second chances. The rain continued to fall, washing away the past and nourishing the seeds of a better future. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what resonated with you most about Victor's journey from darkness to redemption. Your engagement helps us bring more powerful stories like this to listeners around the world.